Lisa Montgomery, the cruel story behind the first woman executed by the U.S. government. On January 13, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was put to death by lethal injection. As the clock struck 1:31 a.m., she became the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government in nearly 7 decades. The case sparked an intense national debate, not only for the crime she committed, but for the layers of trauma, abuse, and mental illness that defined much of her life. Her story is one of tragedy piled upon tragedy, ultimately leading many to question whether true justice was served or whether cruelty simply replaced it. This is not just a recounting of a horrific crime, but an exploration of systemic failures, personal devastation, and moral ambiguity. Today, we dive deep into the story of Lisa Montgomery, the life she lived, the crime she committed, and the legacy of her execution. Lisa Montgomery's life began in a home marked by chaos, neglect, and staggering cruelty. Born in 1968, she was brought into a household where violence was not the exception but the rule. Her mother, reportedly emotionally unstable, abused Lisa in ways that are difficult to fathom. Over the years, Lisa endured beatings, humiliation, and isolation from caring influences. But the abuse didn't stop at physical harm. By the age of 11, Lisa endured sexual violence perpetrated by her stepfather. He constructed a room in the family trailer where he could isolate and assault her repeatedly. When Lisa attempted to speak out, her cries for help were ignored, even taunted by her mother, who further participated in the abuse by sexually trafficking Lisa to men in exchange for money or favors. Imagine a young girl growing up in an environment where betrayal and exploitation came from the very people meant to protect her. These abusive experiences carved deep psychological wounds into Lisa, leaving scars that would inform her actions later in life. Diagnosed later with bipolar disorder, complex PTSD, and psychosis, Lisa's mental health gradually deteriorated, her mind reshaped by the horrors she endured. Adulthood didn't bring respite. Lisa's suffering only intensified. She sought escape through early marriage, but it quickly turned abusive. Her spouse, like her parents, inflicted violence, deepening the mental health challenges that would ultimately spiral out of control. Over the years, Lisa gave birth to 4 children, but eventually underwent sterilization after continued pressure from her first husband. It was a procedure she neither truly consented to nor fully understood, a final blow to her sense of bodily autonomy. But her mental illness took a new form. She began convincing herself and others that she was pregnant again, a delusion she carried forward with unsettling conviction. This lie would prove to be a harbinger of the devastating events that followed. In December 2004, Lisa Montgomery drove to Skidmore, Missouri, to meet Bobby Joe Stinnett, an expectant mother she connected with online through a shared interest in dog breeding. Bobby Joe was vibrant, full of life, and weeks away from giving birth to her first child. Yet, what unfolded that day would shatter her family and leave a permanent scar on the community. Once inside Bobby Joe's home, Lisa brutally attacked her, strangling her while she was still pregnant. In an unthinkable act, Lisa used a kitchen knife to cut the baby from Bobby Joe's womb. She left the young mother to die in a pool of blood, taking the newborn with her in a bizarre attempt to pass the child off as her own. The crime was horrifying in its savagery, but it was also a window into Lisa's fractured state of mind. While many viewed the act as cold and calculated, others argued it was the culmination of years of untreated trauma and delusion. The abduction set off a nationwide manhunt, but within 24 hours, authorities located Lisa at her Kansas home and safely recovered Bobby Joe's baby, who was returned to her grieving father. Lisa's arrest marked the beginning of a bitter legal battle. Prosecutors positioned her as a calculating manipulator who meticulously planned Bobby Joe's murder, using online searches and careful preparation to execute the crime. To them, it was proof of clear intent. A straightforward case for first-degree murder deserving the harshest penalty available. But Lisa's defense team painted a far more complex picture. They argued that her entire life had been a ticking time bomb, forged in the fires of abuse and fanned by the flames of untreated mental illness. Psychiatric experts testified that Lisa suffered from a host of disorders, including bipolar disorder, psychosis, and complex PTSD. They pointed out that her sterilization procedure, paired with her constant delusions of pregnancy, created a psychological break that culminated in the crime. Despite these arguments, public sentiment weighed heavily against her. The brutality of Bobby Joe's death and the precious life that Lisa endangered became the dominant narrative. In 2007, Lisa Montgomery was sentenced to death by lethal injection. As her execution date approached, advocates, both legal professionals and activists, rushed to halt the sentence. Lisa's attorney, Kelly Henry, argued vehemently that executing someone with such significant mental health issues was both unethical and a violation of humane justice. The pleas fell on deaf ears. On the night of January 12, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was moved to the death chamber at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. Strapped to a gurney, she reportedly looked vacant and disconnected, a poignant visual of a life destroyed by decades of mistreatment and a devastating crime. When the lethal injection began, her lawyers issued one final statement. The government stopped at nothing in its efforts to kill this wounded and delusional woman. This execution fell far short of justice. Lisa Montgomery was declared dead at 1:31 a.m. Lisa Montgomery's execution reignited the national debate around capital punishment and mental illness. For some, her death marked a deserved end for the horrors she inflicted on Bobby Joe Stinnett and her family. But for others, it was an unforgivable act of institutional cruelty, ignoring the years of abuse, exploitation, and system failure that drove her toward criminality. Opponents of the death penalty pointed to the irony. A system that failed to protect Lisa as a child opted instead to end her life as an adult. How can justice be served by extinguishing the life of someone who bore the scars of profound, life-altering abuse? Was her punishment truly about justice or about retribution? Lisa Montgomery's story is a chilling mirror of greater systemic failures. Her case highlights the price vulnerable individuals often pay where trauma, poverty, and mental illness meet unchecked. From the failure of authorities to intervene during her abusive childhood, to the court's refusal to fully weigh her mental health during her trial, Lisa passed through countless institutions that prioritized punishment over empathy. That isn't to diminish the suffering endured by Bobby Joe Stinnett's family. Their pain is unimaginable. But the execution of Lisa Montgomery raises a difficult question. Does our justice system leave room for compassion in its pursuit of accountability? Her story also calls into focus the experience of women in the legal system. Lisa was not merely a criminal. She was a person failed at every turn by individuals, institutions, and societal structures that should have acted as a safety net. She existed at the intersection of gender-based violence, economic desperation, and untreated mental illness, yet there was no redemption for her in the eyes of the state. In the end, the execution of Lisa Montgomery was a tragedy on every front. It is a story of lives lost, Bobby Joe Stinnett stolen brutally, and Lisa Montgomery's extinguished by the state. It is a tale of unresolved trauma, unfulfilled responsibilities, and a justice system that too often prioritizes punishment over understanding. True crime fans, this story is not just about the horrifying details of Lisa Montgomery's actions. It is about the echoes of a broken system and the human lives shaped and shattered by it. As we reflect on cases like these, perhaps the most important question we can ask is this: when does justice become a mirror of the cruelty it seeks to condemn?